Afterwards, we're going to move on to the Ethiopian Bible. So I'm really excited. It talks about wet dreams. Deuteronomy 8, pretty much what it's saying, when you eat and you're satisfied and you're happy, you're going to forget God and you're going to say, look at all the things I have. Look at this life I've created for myself. Then the Lord said, don't do that. Don't do that. The 1400s, 1500s, 1600s, there were Hebrew, Black, African, Hebrew people in Africa. So when the book of Deuteronomy talks about curses that come from breaking the commandments of the Lord, I cannot help but see the transatlantic slave trade and the 400 years of slavery here. Deuteronomy 4, and when you look at the sun, the moon, and the stars, do not feel enticed to worship them. He's saying, I am the creator. I gave it to everybody. It's nothing to me. I can make another moon, can make another sun. Hi guys, I am back after many weeks of running around. It's probably been the most eventful 6 months of my life, and I continued reading as I promised I would. 1 year in the Bible with you guys, and the last reflection we stopped at was reflection 7. We actually should be about reflection 14 or 20 by now. Let me see. It should be about 22, reflection 22, and I am just now getting around to recording reflection 8 and 9, but I will commit to finishing all 52 weeks. Like I said, I will do 2 weeks in a video. Afterwards, we're going to move on to the Ethiopian Bible. So I'm really excited. I will be finishing the canonized Bible sometime in July, but my reflections I'll still keep posting afterwards. And actually, I may post them all by the summer. Just because we're going over 52 weeks doesn't mean we have to wait 52 weeks to get through them. All right, so let's get into the reading. So right now, this is reflection for week 8, which is actually Deuteronomy 7 through Joshua. Yes, we're very far behind, so let's catch up. So if you guys remember, we left off in Deuteronomy with Moses, bless you, with Moses dealing with the children of Israel and the headache that they caused. We spoke about the book of Numbers, which you guys remember Korah. Don't be like Korah. Don't be like Miriam. If you remember, they tried to run up on Moses, right? Kill him, and they want to go back to Egypt because they just are not doing well on their own. One of the last things that also happened too was that God had also warned the children of Israel about spiritual prostitution, which spiritual prostitution is like worshiping other gods, eating food dedicated to other gods, and you can still be a spiritual prostitute if you still believe. You can say, oh, well, I believe in Yahweh, right? But I'm also going to, believe in astrology, and I'm also going to burn sage, and I'm also going to practice yoga, which I know a lot of people are like, what are you talking about? You're being too extreme. But these things are from other religions, other spiritual practices. And when you look into the root of where these things come from, then you will understand that these things are forms of worship, right? They're forms of prostituting yourself spiritually to other entities by other means, which we can get that to another time. But yeah, so God's trying to consecrate them because they're coming out of Egypt. And Egypt had so many gods, right? They had a god for everything. The ancient Egyptian empire had been around forever. It was one of the oldest ones, and one of the most technologically advanced when it comes to, right, ancient technology and, divination and truly like physics and, quantum physics. The Hebrew children, they are coming out of living under the Egyptian empire for 400 years. I mean, I think as African Americans, we can relate, right, to being under an empire. under slavery for 400 years. And so we can understand how so many of those practices were embedded into their routine. And so when God and Moses are trying to get them out of these practices, see where the rebellion comes in. And so this is what God has been trying to do with Moses as the leader, which he did not want to be the leader. And so right now, at this point in the biblical story, the biblical timeline, God is trying to consecrate the Hebrew children and circumcise their heart, right? The sign of the covenant at this time was the circumcision of the foreskin, right? The male foreskin. Once we get into the New Testament, the new covenant was circumcision of the heart, right? Which is what Jesus talks about, right, at the Last Supper. And so this is where we are. And so at this point, God is already had tried to kill the children of Israel many times, wanted to take them out many times. And Moses interceded for them. Actually, Moses and Aaron interceded for them, begged God not to do it, begged God to have more patience with them. So you really read it from beginning to end, right? Do you really understand why God wanted to eliminate these Hebrew children so many times? Because obviously God has the foresight. He knows what's in their heart. He knows the outcome. And so he is trying to destroy a people that he knows are going to turn on him, the commandments that he had set forth. But because he loved Moses, and because Moses begged him so many times not to kill the Hebrew children, God did not. And then actually this goes right into the beginning of where we're at, which is pretty much like Deuteronomy 7. The Hebrew children wanted water. They had moved again. So this is the time God's moving them around the desert, actually trying to lead them to the land of Canaan. And because of their rebellion, because of their hardened heart, because of their spiritual prostitution, because they came up against Moses, they talk about Moses and his wife and complain about leaving Egypt. God told him, like, okay, Moses, I'm not going to kill them, but they're not getting into the promised land. So at this time, they're still wandering around the desert. Like, God is not letting them leave the desert until a certain generation of them dies, right? The ones that came out of Egypt, he wants them to die off, and the children he's going to let go over. And so they're at a point where they get to another location and they're so thirsty, and again complaining about water. And they pretty much run up on Moses like, hey, like, we need water, blah, blah, blah. And Moses is so angry and so annoyed with them that he hits the rock more than once. We find out that God says, hey, you can't get over into the promised land. Like, he actually takes Moses up to the mountain and shows him Canaan and says, this is the land I promised, but you cannot go in. God pretty much told Moses, you de-edified me in front of the Hebrew children. You know, you approached this whole situation of getting the water out as if it was common. And God's like, I'm not common. You know, and getting water out of a rock is not common, because God didn't tell him to hit it twice. He was only supposed to hit it once. And you're kind of like, well, that's a little extreme. And why would God not let him in when he loves Moses so much over hitting a rock, you know? But once you read, you will see that it's not because Moses hit the rock twice. It was because the anger that Moses had towards the Hebrew children had transferred to his anger for the Lord. So when he approached the Lord and was hitting the rock, he was just mad with the whole situation. And that's not how you're supposed to approach the Lord as a spiritual leader and as a Christian leader, right? God pretty much told Moses, you de-edified me in front of the Hebrew children. And edification is when you like lift somebody up and you sing their accolades, right? You exalt them. You know, before you introduce somebody, you know, oh, this is my friend so-and-so. He's a doctor, she's a doctor, or she graduated from, you know, this place, or she has an art gallery on, you know, Rodeo or something like that, right? You kind of sing their praises. And so when Moses approached him like that, the Hebrew children in their mind are like, yeah, that's what we thought. Like, he feels the same way we do. And that wasn't the case. Obviously, Moses doesn't feel the same way they do, but that anger and that frustration that Moses had with them and their complaining and him having to be the middleman in their rebellion caused him to pretty much approach this situation of getting the water out of the rock with anger, right? And with content. And that is why I believe that he wasn't able to get over it. And then the thing is, too, it's kind of like, God's like, I love you, Moses, but you are attached to these people and you're kind of not trusting me when I say they need to go. They need to go. Like, but Moses is like, you know, begging for them to be saved and not be killed by God. And God's like, okay, well, I'm not going to kill them, but they're not coming over. And also you're not coming over, because going into that new land, that promised land, you know, it's like you can't bring old things into new things, right? The Bible tells us that you can't pour new wine into old wineskins. Because if you pour new wine into old wineskins, then it's going to burst the skin, like the leather. It's not gonna hold. God is holy, right? He's holy and everything he does is holy. And so the people going into the land need to be consecrated. Their heart needs to be circumcised. And Moses's heart, it's almost as if his heart was influenced by their behavior. Not that his heart was impure, but it was tainted with their energy, right? We all know when somebody brings your vibe down. And when God went to drop Korah into the earth, when he swallowed Korah up and all of his things and all of his family members, right? And everybody around him, God literally told Moses and the other Hebrew children that were watching, don't get too close to Korah, like stand back from him and all of his things, because you are going to get swept away along with his sin. All into just same thing with earthquakes or sinkholes. You know, if you can imagine a modern day sinkhole that we see all over the internet currently, this is pretty much what happened. God created a sinkhole specifically for Korah and his family. And this reflection begins at that point. Deuteronomy is the last book of Moses, right? There's 5 books, right, which they call the Torah: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And so Deuteronomy is pretty much the farewell letter to the Hebrew children. Moses is like, double deuces, shalom, shalom, I'm out of here. He's like, pretty much because of you guys, once again, I'm in hot water and I can't cross over to the promised land. And so Moses is passing his mantle to Joshua, son of Nun. Because Joshua, when God had told the spies to go over to look at the land of Canaan, you remember God was like, check it out. Like, I got this all ready for you. And this is going to be the land I promised you and your ancestors. And it's going to be everything. The other guys that came back were like, yeah, there's giants over there, as we know. The Nephilim. The Bible says there was giants in those days. And they came back and they were like, literally, no, we're going to die. They're going to kill us. Like, they're so big. We're so tiny. And obviously this angered God, because he was like, did I just not part the Red Sea? Like, did I not part the Red Sea? Did I not send plagues on Pharaoh? Did I not kill all the firstborn in Egypt? Did I not turn the water into blood? Like, give me some credit here, right? Yeah, and God was already tired of them by then. As you know, you guys can watch the last video. He was tired of them. So now they wanted to complain about the land that he had promised them. Like, as if he wasn't going to defeat the Canaanites, right? So Joshua was one of the men who went over there who did not come back, with their tail between their legs. He was like, I mean, our God could do it. And God was like, yes, that is the energy. And so this is Joshua So now he's going to be the leader of the Hebrew children. So Moses in the book of Deuteronomy it's this farewell address to the Hebrew children, and Moses does not hold back. He was like, if you guys rebelled in my presence, surely when I'm gone, you guys are gonna wild out. And he was like, pretty much, he was like, do not be spiritual prostitutes, because if you do, God is going to bring his wrath on you and your children and your children's children, which we can see. And so a lot of the book of Deuteronomy is explaining the blessings for those who obey the commands of the Lord. Basic commands: do not commit murder, do not commit adultery, do not lust after your friend's husband or your friend's wife, do not sleep with your friend's husband or wife, do not sleep with your stepdaughter or your stepson, do not sleep with your parents' wife or husband, right? It's kind of like, do not sleep with your brother, do not sleep with your sister, do not sacrifice your children to other gods, do not eat meat sacrificed to other gods, right? And then we have the whole like kosher thing about like the clean and the unclean meats, right? Keep the Sabbath holy. We know pretty much it, because now our society, at least in the Western world, these commandments are pretty common. This was the commands of the Hebrew children, and they knew that. So Moses was just reiterating, like, don't say I didn't tell you, because now we have a whole book in the Bible about what I told you not to do. So when you're born, or somebody you know when they're born, it's like they just constantly have life thrown at them. They never have a fair fight, right? As soon as they're born, it's just one thing after the other. You know, children born with cancer, children born with tumors on their face, children born with extra legs or missing limbs or brain damage. And we're like, what's going on? But it's telling us right here that if you do not follow the commandments of the Lord and you rebel against the commandments of the Lord, these curses, he literally said curses, will follow you and your descendants for up to 4 generations. That's if you guys repent. All right, Deuteronomy 1, the Lord carried you as a father carries his son. Deuteronomy 4, do not create idols of fish, man, beast, or tree. And when you look at the sun, the moon, and the stars, do not feel entitled or enticed to worship them, for the Lord has given them to all nations. So you're saying he's just given it to us. You're not supposed to worship it. The Lord gave it, right? He's saying, I am the creator. I gave it to everybody. It's not something to be idolized. It's nothing to me. I can make another moon. Can make another sun. Okay? Deuteronomy 8, be careful you don't forget God, because when you eat, pretty much what it's saying, it's going to go into say, when you eat and you're satisfied and you're happy, you're going to forget God, and you're going to say, look at all the things I have. Look at look at what my hands have done. Look at what my brains have created. Look at this life I've created for myself. Then the Lord said, don't do that. Don't do that. Then he goes on to say, but the Lord gives power to get wealth. The Lord will destroy those who forget him. So he says it's the Lord who gives you the power to get wealth, not your own hands. And he destroys those who forget him. And then he says, just as a man disciplines his son, so does the Lord discipline you. So pretty much what God's saying is, like, when you get over to the promised land, you're going to have this wealth, you're going to be prosperous, abundant, you guys are going to be so happy, you're not even going to remember Egypt. You're going to be like, oh, I'm so glad that we got out of Egypt. And you know, as the generations go on, you're going to start thinking that this is all coming from your own hands, your own work, your own thoughts, your own mind, that you're so smart that you guys have this wonderful land and you're prosperous, more prosperous than other nations. And you're going to forget that it was me. You're going to start dabbling with these other gods. You're going to start marrying these other people who have other gods, which also Deuteronomy, right? And Leviticus tells you not to, and actually Numbers, marry these women and men from other nations because they're going to kind of seduce you to worship their gods, which actually we see, Solomon, and we see Solomon's children, and we see all through the book of Judges, we see this happening. And so he's like, well, you're going to start dabbling. You're going to start worshiping these other gods. And what these other people do are, abominations to the Lord, And so let's just think about all the things God said not to do. In Leviticus, that's what these other religions and the other rituals are doing, right? He's like, when you start dabbling in these other rituals and things like that to these other gods, I'm going to bring a curse onto you, and you're going to be like, oh, where is God? God forgot about us. So pretty much God is like, you guys are going to turn it on me and say that I forgot about you, and that you're going to be like, where is God? Where was God during slavery? Where was God during this? Where was God during that? Why are these children born like this? Why are people being, into this and that? And God isn't real because of that. If God was real, then these things would have happened. But he's saying clearly, like, you're going to say that. Like, he already said, you're gonna blame me for the things that are happening. You're gonna ask where I'm at, and I'm going to tell you that I'm not there. That I've already told you, don't break my commandments, because God is holy. Therefore, we are called to be holy. God is holy, and therefore the Hebrew children are called to be holy. And he said, but if my people who are called by my name humble themselves and pray and seek my face, then I will heal their land and I will deliver them. And so throughout the Old Testament, as we keep going, you will see constantly the Hebrew children falling away from God, rebelling, worshiping other guys, spiritual prostitution, falling into the pit, right? Having these horrible lives, being overtaken by foreign lands, being invaded, and them humbling themselves, turning to God, starting to follow their commandments for the next generation or two, and God restores all, right? And makes them prosperous. And it's this kind of back and forth, relationship with God and the Hebrew children. And so this is what we're seeing in Deuteronomy. God, through Moses, God is warning the Hebrew children of these things, because he knew in 2026 you're going to have questions, and he's going to be able to still tell you why these things have happened. And you'll see as we move forward through the Old Testament that constantly the kings and some people who were born into generations of rebellion turn towards God and find these same commandments, reading the word, the same words that we're reading, and decide to change their life and to teach their children, teach their families how to obey the commandments of the Lord. And some things never change, because that is what we are still called to do, is to read the commandments of the Lord, obey the commandments of the Lord, and to teach, right, the commandments of the Lord. The other thing I thought was really interesting, in Deuteronomy 9, it says, it's not account of your righteousness that the Lord gives you the land to possess, but more because of their wickedness, right? And I just think that it goes into why sometimes God uses some people to pass his judgment on them. And like I was saying before, don't know if I'm going to keep this in the video, but as I believe with, the transatlantic slave trade, it's like, let's look at what the text says. If these things follow those who are rebellious, and it's also saying that God is giving the Hebrew children this land, the land of Canaan, the promised land, who literally other people are in possession, it's not because, oh, I deserve it, right? It's because they're doing so much wickedness that I'm going to use you to pass judgment on them and to desolate them, right? And God generally does these types of things in order to get people to turn and look for him, right? Because when we're oppressed, when we're going through hardship, when we're going through the crucible, we're seeking higher power, right? Because we are spirit, we come from God, we're made in God's image, we are spirit, so we search for spiritual answers, and we search for somebody higher spiritually who can help us navigate through this. And so I know is Deuteronomy 11 says, I am setting before you a blessing and a curse. The blessing if you obey the commandments of the Lord, and the curse if you disobey the commands and turn and follow other gods. It's like in black and white print right here. It's pretty much plain text. Like, we can kind of understand that, you disobey, then, bad things are going to happen. All right. So another thing I thought was like really interesting is it talks about wet dreams, and this is Deuteronomy 23, I believe, and it said that if any of you have wet dreams, that he must leave the camp during the day and then bathe, and then in the evening they can return at sunset. The other thing is that everybody must use the bathroom like outside of the camp, because you have to remember the Hebrew encampment was like all 12 tribes, and it had its own structure. Like each tribe was in its own section, and it was just like very large. And so God's saying, like, you need to go outside of the encampment structure to use the bathroom, poop and pee in a hole, and then cover it up. And he said, because the camp must be holy, because your God is holy, and the Lord your God moves around your tent, protecting you and defending you from your enemies. And the thing I love about that is that it just shows how intimate and personable Yahweh is, our God is. And the reason I say Yahweh is because Yahweh is our God, right? The God of this Bible. And as we talked about in the last video, how each religion has their own God. If you look at the characteristics of that God, that's how you will know what they, that's how you know who they are, right? That's how we can tell them apart, right? This is Yahweh's personality, very personal, very intimate, very strong, but also very specific and tender about how he relates. And he keeps telling the Hebrew children how to stay holy, because he wants closeness with them, right? He's telling us how to stay holy in order to have closeness with us, because he is a holy God, and he cannot fellowship with you when there is sin and wickedness and uncleanness in your spirit, right? When the heart is uncircumcised, right? That's why Jesus, once again, is our high priest. Yahuwah, right, is our high priest. And when we receive him, we take on his spirit, we take on his likeness, and God can dwell with us, can fellowship with us, can have that closeness with us because of Jesus. That's why Jesus is so important. That's why we call him our high priest, our mediator, right? Because without him, the wickedness, the sin that is on us would not allow us to be as intimate with God. I thought this was really, really interesting, because I know everybody likes to talk about whether, drug dealers and prostitutes should be allowed to send money to the church, right? Because, a lot of people say, oh, well, the church needs the money no matter what. But when we read our Bible, it literally says that no offerings from prostitutes, man or woman, are allowed to be accepted in the tabernacle. Because honestly, it's just like, if we're not supposed to eat food dedicated to other gods, and we're not supposed to possess things called loaded objects, which we'll see also in the book of Joshua. He went into battle and, had gone aside, and actually the Hebrew children lost the battle viciously. God told him, because some people in the Hebrew camp, things that were already offered to some of those gods in those other territories, and they brought them back, and God knew about it. Joshua didn't know about it, and God said, because of that, like, you guys weren't going to win the battle. And that just proves again how holy God is. And so Joshua had to prepare a sin offering for that. And after they did that, they went into battle again and they won. So, and then also too, this other thing says, Deuteronomy 13 says that, it says, if the prophet foretells the future and that future comes true, then the prophet says, so now let's follow this other God that I think is a really good idea and let's worship him. Then the Bible is saying that that's God testing you to see if you really love him or if your heart's really with him or not. Which we actually see happens like kind of like in this other book. I can't remember. I think it was 1st or 2nd Samuel. But all right, so this is Deuteronomy 28:15. Curses for disobedience. However, if you do not obey the Lord your God and do not carefully follow all of his commandments and decrees I am giving you today, this is Moses, I am giving you today, all these curses will come on you and overtake you. Are you guys ready? Pretty much describe the transatlantic slave trade, which was like one of the most cruelest slave trades to ever exist, and is actually still going on today. The Arab slave trade is still going on today. And before we get into all of that, I don't even want to go into the religions of people from Africa, because Africa is a continent, not a country. There were so many religions, there were so many religious practices, and yes, there were many African Hebrew children. As we know, Sephora was Ethiopian, Black, Sudanese. She had children with Moses, and that was still in Africa. So that was in Egypt still, but whatever. So we know that the whole Bible takes place in brown and melanated arid regions. They're in Africa, and all of Northeast Africa was a part of ancient biblical timeline. Okay, so by the time we get to the colonization, right?
Long before they knew of the Igbo's existence, many Jews and Christians believed that Africa might be home to a hidden pocket of Israelites. Why? The Talmud claims that some portions of the 10 lost tribes ended up in Africa. Plus, the biblical book of Zephaniah states that dispersed Israelites will return from beyond the rivers of Cush. So when the British Empire sent expeditions up the River Niger, the UK's chief rabbis handed colonial authorities a pack of letters written in Hebrew, just in case they happened to encounter any tribes of Israel.
What's up, family? This is your man, not your boy. Go black to Africa. So I made it to my destination down here in the Igbo land. Aguleri.
Precisely.
Yeah. Yes. And this is King
Fidelis. Akuba Okafor.
Okay.
Yeah.
He is a king, a representative in
Igbo community in the Republic of Guinea.
In Guinea.
Yes.
So I was in Ghana, and the king there of the Igbo people in Ghana,
yeah.
Yes, he connected me with the king here, who would show me around and kind of also introduce me to the king that's of all the Igbo people.
Yes.
What is his majesty's name?
His Majesty Chukwuemeka Eri.
Chukwuemeka Eri.
Yeah. He's the one sitting on the Eri throne.
He's the one sitting on the Eri throne.
Yeah, the Eri is the 5th son of God, and God is 7th son of Jacob.
Now hold up.
Yeah.
You probably didn't catch what he just said. Say that one more time.
Oh, good. What I'm saying is, he is going to meet the king.
I'm going to meet the king.
Yeah,
yep.
Who is sitting on the Eri throne.
Yes.
Eri is the 5th son of God, and God is the 7th son of Jacob.
The 5th son of God. Now, you got to understand something.
Yeah.
That is God, G-A-D, who is part of the 12 tribes of Israel. We're going to get in more into the Igbo people. You say you're from the tribe of God.
Yeah.
Who his 5th son was Eri.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And
he is the 7th son of Jacob.
And he's the 7th son of Jacob.
Yes.
So
and Jacob, the 3rd son of Abraham.
Yes, 3rd son of Abraham.
Yes.
The Lemba community of southern Africa are strict monotheists. They celebrate the new moon and keep kosher. They circumcise their baby boys and observe Shabbat. So the Lemba agreed to give DNA samples to be studied against other Jewish populations. The Lemba weren't just descended from Jews. They had the distinct genetic marker found only in Kohanim, aka Jews from the priestly caste.
Yes, migration and multiplication, right? Be fruitful and multiply. The 1400s, 1500s, 1600s, there were Hebrew, black, melanated, African, Hebrew people in Africa. So when the book of Deuteronomy talks about these curses that come from breaking the commandments of the Lord, I cannot help but see the transatlantic slave trade and the 400 years of slavery here. You will become a thing of horror to all kingdoms of the earth. Your carcasses will be food for all the birds and the wild animal, and there will be no one to frighten them away. Like, just the fact that he is talking about eaten on pretty much by birds, we have plenty of documentation of African Americans in America not only being lynched, but their bodies being hung. This was even on plantations and after plantations during the Jim Crow era, being hung, and birds feeding on their bodies. I believe it was Billie Holiday had a song called Strange Fruit about birds eating fruit off of a tree that was strange because they weren't actually eating fruit. They were eating flesh, rotting flesh of African Americans who were being hung and left out. So it's a very hard thing for many people to connect the dots. A lot of people want to say that Christianity is evil and that the only reason why African Americans, black people, believe in the Bible is because the white man, because Christianity was forced on black people during slavery. But that is not the truth, because Christianity has been a part of African culture and African heritage, and the Bible is a book of brown and black people until we really even get to the New Testament, right? When we start getting like the Greeks and the Asia Minors, these types of other people involved, right? The Gentiles with the Gospels. And it makes sense to me why this happened. And I do believe it's because the Africans who were enslaved, who were stuck in slavery for generations, were Hebrew children who were disobedient, whether it was their grandparents or their forefathers. The Bible clearly tells us that your children will and I'll get into it, be taken from you, be stolen from you. Your husband and wives will be taken from you as well. And I know that's happened to also the Native Americans, and I'm sure some other cultures around the world. I know for a fact that this is part of the African American history, the Pan-African, right, timeline, and it's also part of the Native American timeline. And so, to me, once I started reading, it was more obvious that we were disobedient. And I'm speaking for myself as African American, that we were disobedient to Yahweh and that we were under a curse, right? Because African Americans' bodies, the slaves' bodies, and even freed slaves, right, in the Jim Crow era and even afterwards, even up until the 80s, their bodies were being hung overnight. And the Bible says that if their body is hanging, that means that person is under a curse. And it says that you will be a byword, right? What's a byword? Like, it's a common word, right? The N-word, right? We know, everybody around the world knows the N-word, right? People who don't even speak English know that word, right? Deuteronomy 28 also says, if you disobey the commands of the Lord, there'll be lack in everything you do, and that the Lord will be an iron yoke to your neck. The Lord will send confusion and frustration in everything you do, and also you will be robbed and oppressed continually. That sounds familiar. We'll move on. You will suffer constant oppression and harsh treatment. This is Deuteronomy 28. You will plant much and reap little. Wow. Deuteronomy 28:30 says, "You will be pledged to be married to a woman, but another will take her and rape her. You will build a house, but you will not live in it. You will plant vineyards, but you will not even begin to enjoy its fruit. Your ox will be slaughtered before your eyes, but you will eat none of it. Your donkey will be forcibly taken from you, and will not return. Your sheep will be given to your enemies, and no one will rescue them. Your sons and your daughters will be given to another nation, and you will wear out your eyes watching them day after day, powerless to lift a hand. People that you do not know will eat what your land and labor produce, and you will have nothing but cruel oppression all of your days. You will become a thing of horror, a byword, and an object of ridicule among all the peoples where the Lord drives you." And so for me, that sounds like the constant rejection of blackness around the world, the constant rejection of darkness around the world, and how globally, and not so much obviously in the last 20, 30 years, but if we just talk about contemporary history, how globally the African American, the African, right, the Pan-African person, somebody a part of the African diaspora, has been ridiculed and always at the bottom of the totem pole. And it doesn't matter which country you go to, this is how it was. We have to be spiritually responsible and mature to say, okay, this is why we have been oppressed or marginalized for so long, 400 years. We disobeyed God, we disobeyed Yahweh, we disobeyed the commandments, and we continue to perpetuate a disobedience until enough of us were reborn, were saved, began to live according to the word, and as the Bible tells us that God will turn, right, once we humble ourselves and turn back to him. And so those were the curses. Actually, this was just some of them. That was a handful. There was literally 10 times that amount. But it also has the blessings, right? And so all of the curses that are in Deuteronomy 28, there's also so many blessings in Deuteronomy 28. So what we do, and you're like, how do I stop that? Well, what you do is you give your life right to Christ. Christ is the atonement offering, right? The sin offering. And just like as the book of Leviticus talks about the royal priesthood, right, the Levites, and how they were responsible for handling the sin offerings and the atonement offerings. Now that we are living after the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ, Christ is our atonement. He is our sin offering. He is our spotless lamb. And when we put our trust and faith in Jesus, then we are stopping that hemorrhage. So this is what Moses says to Joshua. He brings Joshua to the tabernacle, and he says, God tells Moses, bring Joshua to the tabernacle so I can commission him. So God was giving Moses the rundown to tell Joshua. And he said, after you are gone, these people will begin to worship foreign gods. I know the intentions of these people even now before they have entered the land. So God already knew what it was. And he said, even while you are here, they have rebelled, right? How much more rebellious will they be after your death? And actually the Bible says that God himself buried Moses' body, okay? They will become utterly corrupt and turn away. Disaster will come down on them. They will abandon me and break my covenant. My anger will blaze against them. I will abandon them, hiding my face. They will be devoured. And then they will say, our God is no longer with us. So that's pretty much all I got from Deuteronomy. It was a lot. It was a mouthful. It's been a while since we did a reflection, but I will stay on top of it. I'm going to get off of here and start taking notes for my next reflection. And don't forget to read your Bible. Bye.